Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that the silence in your life isn't a sign of God's absence but His presence? That the isolation you're feeling isn't rejection but redirection? We often pray for purpose, for clarity, for growth, but when everything falls quiet and the crowd disappears, we begin to wonder if we've been forgotten. Yet it's in those very moments of loneliness and stillness that God is doing His deepest work. What if the season you're trying to escape is the very place where you're being made? When a person finds themselves suddenly alone, cut off from their usual rhythms, left out of familiar circles, and wrapped in silence, the immediate instinct is to feel abandoned. There's a sting that comes with the emptiness of isolation. The mind begins its slow march toward doubt, whispering that perhaps something is wrong with you, that maybe you've been forgotten, cast aside, or are no longer needed in the grand story of life. But this is a mistake, and one that has led many into unnecessary despair. The truth, as so often is the case with the things of God, is far deeper and far kinder than we assume. Isolation is not always abandonment. In many cases, it is preparation. When God isolates you, it is not because He has turned His face from you, but because He is setting the stage for something more. Think of the craftsman who steps away from the crowd to enter his workshop. There, in the quiet, he picks up a piece of raw material that no one has yet admired. It is rough, unshaped, uncelebrated. But in the hands of the craftsman, this raw material is not dismissed, it is chosen. It is being prepared. The noise of the world has no place in the workshop. The voices that seek applause or judgment have no bearing there. What happens in that space is deeply personal, deeply intentional. The same is true when God isolates a soul. He removes it from the crowd, not to punish it, but to prepare it for a purpose that cannot be formed in the open. Some callings are too delicate to be shaped in public. Some transformations are too intimate to be witnessed by others. And so, in His wisdom, God takes you aside, like a surgeon who draws the curtain before beginning the most delicate of procedures. He draws you away into solitude so He can work where no one else sees. It may feel like hiding, but it is sacred hiding. There is a reason the greatest figures in Scripture faced long seasons of isolation before stepping into their purpose. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness tending sheep before he was called to lead a nation. David was anointed king, yet returned to the fields to watch sheep and play his harp alone. Joseph spent years in a prison cell, cut off from family and opportunity, before stepping into the palace. These weren't detours. They weren't missteps. They were divine preparations. The wilderness is not a void. It is the forge of character. The prison cell is not a delay. It is the soil of dreams that must first die before they rise again in their true form. It is in isolation that we confront ourselves as we are. No crowds to impress, no masks to wear, no one to applaud or critique, just the soul and its maker. And in that raw honesty, God begins the real work. The kind of work that doesn't just decorate the outside but reconstructs the foundation. He breaks illusions. He removes dependencies. He draws out impurities that would have gone unnoticed in the distraction of community. What is left is not a wounded soul, but a wiser one. Not a broken vessel, but a refined instrument ready for use. We often think we're ready for our calling because we feel eager. But eagerness is not readiness. Desire is not maturity. And public recognition is not the same as spiritual preparedness. God knows this. He sees the hidden weaknesses that applause would never reveal. He sees the fears that busyness keeps buried. And because He loves us too much to send us unprepared, He isolates us, not to shame us, but to shape us. The waiting may feel long. The silence may feel unbearable. But the truth is, God is nearer than He has ever been. Just as the potter's hands are closest when the clay is spinning on the wheel, so too is God close in the spinning silence of isolation. He presses, He molds, He watches with care, and He waits until the shape is just right. Not perfect by human standards, but ready by His. Isolation, then, is not the sign of God's absence, but the evidence of his attention. It is not a punishment. It is preparation. A chosen soul drawn aside, being readied for something beyond imagination. There comes a moment in the journey of every soul when it is not the noise of the world that wounds the most, but the stillness that follows. It is not the battles that exhaust the spirit, but the quiet in which we must sit with our own thoughts, our own regrets, our own fears. And yet, strangely, it is in that quiet, that heavy, holy silence where healing often begins. When God isolates a person, it is rarely just to remove them from others. More often it is to restore something inside that has been broken, bruised, or slowly worn thin by the friction of life. He hides you to heal you to. The human soul was not designed to endure constant exposure. We are fragile in ways we do not admit, vulnerable in corners of ourselves we have not fully explored. We go through things we do not process, losses we bury, disappointments we minimize, hurts we carry with smiles. Over time, these accumulate like hidden wounds beneath a thick coat of armor. The world applauds us for moving on, for staying strong, for pressing forward. But God, in his gentleness, sees that moving on is not always healing. He sees beneath the surface. And when the time is right, he calls us away not to punish, but to bind up the unseen bruises that have long been ignored. It is not always comfortable to be hidden. There is something in us that longs to be seen, to be connected, to be useful. So when God places us in a season of quiet, when invitations stop, when relationships shift, when doors close, the instinct is to question what we've done wrong. But the truth is, being hidden is not the same as being lost. And healing does not happen in haste or in crowds. Like a physician who draws the curtain around the patient's bed before treating the wound, God draws you into solitude so the soul can be tended to in privacy. No distractions, no performances, just a safe place to fall apart and be remade. There are wounds you didn't even know were bleeding until you were alone long enough to feel the ache. There are fears you didn't realize were driving your decisions until everything went quiet. And there are lies you believed about yourself, lies whispered into your heart over years of disappointment that only become visible when the noise of affirmation disappears. Healing begins when the noise ends. And the noise must end so the deeper voice can be heard, the voice that says, "You are mine, still. You are loved still. Even now." God does not rush healing. He is not the hurried physician, nor the indifferent caretaker. He works patiently, carefully, peeling back the layers of our defenses. He invites us to weep where we never wept, to ask questions we never dared ask, to grieve losses we thought we had buried. The pain that surfaces in isolation is not a sign of harm, but of healing in motion. Like a wound that begins to throb the moment it is cleaned, the ache is not the enemy, it is the beginning of restoration. And yet, this healing is often misunderstood. It feels like weakness when strength has always been your shield. It feels like regression when progress has been your identity. But God is not interested in the masks we wear. He is not moved by appearances. He reaches down into the depths not to condemn but to comfort. His hiding is a holy act. He places you in a shadow so your soul can breathe again, so the cracks can be mended, so your inner world long ignored can be restored to peace. There are truths that can only be whispered in silence. There is grace that only reaches the soul when it stops performing. And there is healing that only takes root when the noise has faded and the person has been stripped of all they thought made them strong. That is where God meets you, not as a coach shouting from the sidelines, but as a healer sitting quietly at your side. What looks like isolation is often divine intimacy. What feels like being hidden from the world is often being held by the hand of God. It is in these moments, away from applause, away from explanation, that your soul is gently reassembled. Not to be the same, but to be whole. Not to return to what was, but to become something new. And in that hidden place, healing becomes more than just repair, it becomes transformation. There is a strange kind of silence that falls upon the soul during certain seasons of life. a silence not born from emptiness, but from mystery. It is not the silence of abandonment, but the kind that follows after prayer has been spoken, and no answer seems to come. You speak and nothing echoes back. You seek and the door remains closed. It is in this silence that many hearts begin to waver. Doubt creeps in like a fog, and despair tries to make itself at home. But the silence of God is never truly silent. What appears to be empty is often full of unseen work. What feels like absence is often the space where the deepest truths are planted, where the soul is invited to listen more deeply than it ever has before. When God seems quiet, we assume he has nothing to say, but silence is its own kind of language. It is not the absence of communication, but the form of it that does not always fit our expectations. We want clear answers, immediate signs, and loud confirmations. But God often speaks in the language of stillness, in the sacred hush that demands we sit longer, dig deeper, and trust more fully. He does not always shout above the noise. He waits for the noise to stop. And when it does, when all the lesser voices fall silent, his whisper becomes unmistakably clear. The silence of God is never careless. It is never random. It is always purposeful, always precise. In the hidden chambers of the Spirit, he begins to work where the eye cannot see and the mind cannot follow. This kind of work cannot be rushed. It is not theatrical. It is not designed for display. It is holy. And so it happens quietly. He tears down things that were built on pride. He uproots beliefs that were grown in fear. He scrapes away the layers we thought were strength, but were actually defense mechanisms built out of past pain. These things are not undone with noise. They are undone with time, with silence, with careful attention. Many people mistake this silence for distance, but distance is not the same as stillness. A teacher is most silent during the test, not because they are absent, but because they have already prepared the student. In the same way, God's quiet is not a sign of his absence, but a sign of his trust, that you are growing, that you are learning to walk by faith, and not by the constant crutch of feeling. We often say we trust God, but it is in the silence where that trust is truly tested. Can you still believe when you cannot hear? Can you still follow when the path is unclear? Can you still love when the feelings fade? In this quiet, many things are revealed. Our need for constant reassurance is exposed. Our dependence on external validation becomes visible. We begin to notice how much we have confused the noise of life with the VOD. We have relied on the lights and sounds of spiritual activity without learning to sit in the stillness of spiritual intimacy. But in the quiet, the false comforts are stripped away, and what remains is the raw, honest space where real faith is formed. It is in that very space that the soul, aching for certainty, begins to understand what trust actually means. There is something sacred in the way God uses silence. He does not waste it. He uses it to sift us, to humble us, and to draw us closer not by sensation, but by truth. In the quiet we discover who we are when we are not being watched, not being praised, not being needed. We find that God's presence is not a feeling but a fact, not a wave of emotion but a constant and eternal reality. We learn that faith was never meant to be built on feelings alone, but on the enduring assurance that even when God is silent, he is still good, still present, still working. Often the silence is when God is doing his finest work, planting seeds that will grow into understanding years later, redirecting the soul so subtly that we do not even realize we've been moved. In that silence, the roots of faith grow deeper, the noise of fear begins to fade, and the heart becomes strong enough to carry what it could not before. The silence is not the end of the story. It is the sacred middle, the place where something invisible and eternal is being formed, not in the open, not with fanfare, but in the quiet where only God can be heard. The human heart is often drawn to the idea of immediate reward. We long for the destination more than the journey. When a promise is given, our instinct is to look for its fulfillment right away. Yet time and time again, life teaches us that the greatest blessings are not handed to us without preparation. The path to promise always runs through the wilderness. It is a consistent pattern in the story of humanity that before God delivers a person into their purpose, He first leads them into a place of obscurity, stripping away distractions and comforts until only the essentials remain. The wilderness is never accidental. It is the sacred place between revelation and realization, between calling and commission. The wilderness by nature is a place of lack. It offers no comforts, no crowds, no applause. It is barren, vast, and unfamiliar. And yet it is here that some of the most significant transformation takes place. In this dry land, the soul is tested. The illusions we carried with us into the wilderness begin to crumble. Our motivations are exposed. Our expectations are challenged. It is not a place where one can pretend. There is no stage in the wilderness, only sand and silence. And that silence becomes a mirror in which we see ourselves clearly, not the version we present to others, but the one we try to hide even from ourselves. In this uncomfortable clarity, something powerful begins to unfold. The person we thought we were begins to die, and the person we were meant to be begins to emerge. The wilderness strips away the noise and shows us what we truly depend on. It is not punishment, though it often feels harsh. It is refinement. The journey through this space is rarely short and never easy, but it is necessary. One cannot carry a divine calling with untested hands. One cannot steward a great purpose with a shallow heart. So the wilderness becomes a classroom, and every dry step a lesson in faith. History is filled with these wilderness stories. Before Moses could stand before Pharaoh, he spent 40 years in the desert, tending sheep and walking in silence. Before David wore a crown, he ran for his life through caves and foreign lands, misunderstood and hunted. Before Joseph wore royal robes, he wore chains. Betrayed, forgotten, falsely accused, his wilderness was both a prison and a path. Even the Son of God, before beginning his ministry, was led into the wilderness to be tempted and to fast, to wrestle with his mission in the solitude of that desolate place. The pattern is unmistakable. The wilderness precedes the promised land because it prepares the heart to live in the promise without being ruined by it. Without the testing, the blessing would destroy us. Without the silence, we would not hear the still, small voice. Without the stripping away, we would mistake the gift for the giver. The wilderness humbles us. It breaks down pride, reveals hidden idols, and teaches us to walk by faith and not by sight. It is here, when everything is taken, that we learn that God is enough. There is a peculiar grace in the wilderness, one that only becomes visible when we stop resisting it. We begin to see that we were not brought here to be forgotten, but to be remembered in a new way, not remembered by the world, but remembered by God. The wilderness slows us down to a holy pace. It removes the pressure to perform and invites us into a quiet trust. Each day becomes a choice, to turn back to what is familiar or to walk forward into the unknown, guided only by a promise we cannot yet see. The wilderness is where character is formed in the unseen. It is where God's voice becomes clear, not because it grows louder, but because everything else grows quiet. It is where we learn that the promise is not only about a destination, but about the kind of person we are becoming on the way there. We come to realize that the true gift is not just the promised land, but the journey that prepared us for it. It is in the barren places that our roots grow deep enough to support the weight of the blessings to come. We are not lost in the wilderness. We are being led slowly, purposefully, lovingly to a place where we can finally receive what was always meant for us, not just with our hands, but with hearts that are truly ready. One of the most misunderstood experiences in the life of faith is the moment when doors begin to close, when the world seems to shrink, and opportunities slip quietly out of reach. It feels like rejection. It feels like failure. But the deeper truth is that God does not simply allow these closures for no reason. He is, in His unseen wisdom, protecting you from things you cannot yet understand. What feels like loss is often mercy. What looks like a missed opportunity is often a divine shield placed between you and something that would have distracted you, harmed you, or pulled you off course. In isolation, this protection becomes more visible, though it may still not be fully understood until much later. There are seasons when we are eager to pursue paths that look good to the eyes, that seem beneficial, promising, even noble. We pray, we plan, we push forward, and yet the door does not open. The silence stretches. The progress halts. We may find ourselves questioning our worth or wondering if we heard God correctly in the first place. But divine protection often works in this subtle way. God sees the entire landscape of your life, past, present, and future, and He knows what you are not yet ready to face. He knows what looks attractive but is laced with danger. He knows what would fill your hands but empty your soul. And so, in His love, He isolates you. To be protected is not always to be sheltered in visible ways. Sometimes it means being withheld from things your heart desires. Sometimes it means being pulled away from a crowd you long to impress, or separated from relationships you thought would last forever. There are people who cannot walk with you into the next season not because they are bad, but because they were only meant to accompany you for a time. There are dreams that must die before they blossom again in the right season. There are roles, responsibilities, and routines that seemed essential but were quietly exhausting your spirit. And so God, ever the loving Father, steps in and closes the doors. But when you're on the inside of those doors and everything outside of them still glows with the light of desire, it's hard to see the kindness in being shut out. We equate restriction with rejection and limitation with punishment. But God does not work through shame. He works through love that is willing to disappoint our temporary expectations in order to protect our eternal calling. He is not in a hurry to satisfy our short-term comfort if it means compromising the long-term health of our soul. In isolation, these divine protections start to reveal themselves. We begin to see how fragile our plans truly were, how easily we were distracted by praise, how entangled we had become with pleasing others. We start to recognize that the opportunities we cried over were not denied, but delayed or simply replaced by something better. When the noise fades, so does the illusion. We begin to appreciate the doors that didn't open, not because we stopped caring, but because we started trusting. We realize that some of the greatest gifts God gives are not what He adds to our lives, but what He removes gently, decisively, without our full understanding. Isolation is not always about being removed from others. Sometimes it is about being removed from things that looked good, but were slowly eroding your faith. It is about being rescued from subtle compromises, from invisible traps, from roads that led somewhere but not somewhere holy. God loves too deeply to allow you to drift into comfort if it means drifting away from your calling. And so He intervenes, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, always purposefully. The gift of isolation is that it eventually clears the vision. What once looked like a curse begins to look like mercy. The no becomes a not yet, or even a not ever, but either way, it is cloaked in kindness. The absence of what you wanted becomes the presence of what you needed. Space to breathe, room to grow, clarity to listen. In time, you begin to see that the rejections were redirections. The delays were developments. The unanswered prayers were the very things that kept your soul alive. And what felt like God withholding was actually God covering you, guarding you, shaping you for something more lasting than anything you could have chosen for yourself. In the quiet corners of life, where the clamor fades and familiar patterns dissolve, the soul often discovers something it never expected to find: identity. Not the identity shaped by achievements, applause, or approval, but the core self, the person you are when no one is watching, when there is no stage to stand on and no audience to impress. When God isolates a person, it is not to strip them of value, but to remove the layers that have buried their true self. It is an unraveling not of worth, but of false identities that were never meant to define you in the first place. The world has a way of telling you who you are. It forms labels around performance, appearance, relationships, or reputation. Over time, these labels feel like skin-close, familiar, inseparable. You become the role you play, the job you hold, the success you achieve, or even the failure you carry. But in the absence of noise, when you are pulled away from the places and people that reinforce these images, something begins to change. You are left with only yourself and the God who made you. And in that uncomfortable, quiet space, He begins to speak identity not based on what you do, but based on who you are and, more importantly, whose you are. Isolation often removes the mirrors we've relied on for reflection. Without the daily affirmations or the structured routines that define our worth, we begin to wrestle with questions we've long ignored. Who am I when I'm not being useful? Who am I when no one needs me? Who am I when the applause has faded? These questions are painful but necessary. They are the beginning of the undoing, the sacred process of shedding the false self and awakening to the soul as God sees it. Not for what it produces, but for what it is. Loved, chosen, known. This process is not instant. It rarely comes with clear answers at first. Instead, it often feels like wandering in a fog, unsure of what remains when everything else is stripped away. And yet, even in that fog, a deeper truth begins to take root. You were never meant to be sustained by titles or tasks. You were not created to survive on attention or activity. You were made for intimacy, a relationship with the one who formed you, who sees past every performance and still delights in your presence. The soul in isolation is invited to rest, not a surface-level rest that merely pauses the pace of life, but a soul-deep rest that resets the rhythm of existence. In the absence of striving, the heart relearns how to simply be. It remembers how to listen. It rediscovers the voice of God that was drowned out by the constant pressure to perform. And in that rediscovery, something sacred happens. Your worth is no longer measured by your work. Your identity is no longer tangled in outcomes. You begin to understand that you are enough, not because of what you achieve, but because of who your Creator says you are. Many resist this season. They reach for anything that will fill the silence, distract the mind, or numb the questions. But those who embrace it, who allow the discomfort to refine instead of define them, begin to walk in a different kind of confidence. Not loud, not arrogant, but rooted, steady, whole. They carry with them a clarity that cannot be shaken by praise or destroyed by criticism. They walk in identity that was forged not in public, but in private, in the quiet wilderness where God renamed them, not based on their history, but on their destiny. This is the identity that endures. It does not rise and fall with circumstances. It does not evaporate when seasons shift. It remains anchored in eternal truth. In isolation, this truth has room to grow. It is no longer choked by comparison or suffocated by expectation. It breathes freely. And in that freedom, the soul becomes who it was always meant to be, not a reflection of the world, but a reflection of its maker. Not a product of pressure, but a vessel of peace. And in the stillness, the whisper becomes unmistakable. You are mine, not because of what you do, but simply because I made you and I do not make mistakes. There comes a point in every soul's journey where the path ahead grows quiet and lonely, and you wonder if anything meaningful is still happening. In that stillness, when the world no longer celebrates you, when familiar voices are no longer near, when progress seems paused and prayers feel unanswered, it may seem like life has stopped moving. But hidden beneath that silence, something holy is taking place. In the unseen depths of isolation, God is doing a work not visible to human eyes. This hidden work is slow, deep, and sacred, like seeds being sown in the dark soil, silent and unnoticed, yet destined for a harvest beyond imagination. Growth in the kingdom of God rarely looks like progress in the eyes of the world. The world measures growth by speed, noise, and recognition, but God measures growth by depth, surrender, and transformation. And so, when He isolates you, He does not do so out of punishment, but out of purpose. The isolation becomes a workshop, a forge, a womb where the soul is reshaped, refined, and readied for what is yet to come. Though no one else may see what is happening, though there is no applause or affirmation, God sees. And He is never idle. In this hidden place, God begins to plant things within you that are not meant for the moment, but for the mission ahead. He places strength where there was fear. He deposits wisdom where there was impulse. He nurtures endurance, patience, and resilience, not through instant miracles, but through slow, faithful days of walking in the unseen. You may not feel stronger. You may not look different. But beneath the surface, your roots are growing deeper, steady enough to hold the weight of what you will carry later. The world may overlook this stage, but God never does. There are reasons why certain things must be hidden. Not everything is meant to bloom in public. Some of the most beautiful transformations happen away from the crowd, away from the noise, where the only voice that matters is the one who called you by name. When you are unseen by others, you become more visible to God, not because He ever lost sight of you, but because you begin to see yourself as He sees you. There is a quiet glory in this season, a soft and steady grace that teaches you to trust without needing evidence, to believe without constant reassurance. The unseen work is what gives your future its foundation. It is what shapes your character, not just your gifts. Gifts can open doors, but only character can keep them open. And so while you may be longing to be released into something bigger, God is more interested in making sure you are strong enough to handle it. He is not slow in fulfilling His promises. He is thorough. He is faithful. And so He works in silence, crafting a vessel worthy of the purpose it will one day carry. There is also mercy in the hidden season. Being unseen shields you from the pressures and distractions that can distort a soul not yet ready for the spotlight. It is a form of protection, a place where you can fail quietly, learn honestly, and grow deeply without the weight of performance. God is not building a platform for you. He is building a person, someone who knows how to carry love, integrity, humility, and courage when the time comes to step forward. And when that time comes, the world may be surprised by your strength, but you won't be. Because you'll remember the quiet days. You'll remember the fire of solitude, the stillness of waiting, the invisible shaping that took place when no one was watching but God. This kind of growth cannot be rushed. It cannot be skipped, but it is never wasted. Every unnoticed day, every silent night, every tear shed in private, every prayer whispered in faith, they are all counted, all woven into a tapestry you cannot yet see. And when the time is right, the very things that grew in the dark will bloom in the light. You will not be who you were. You will be who He made you to be, not because of the stage, but because of the shaping that so. Dear soul, do not despise the silence. Do not curse the solitude. What feels like abandonment is often divine arrangement. God is not punishing you, He is preparing you. He is not hiding from you, He is hiding you. In the stillness, He is forming the strength you will need. In the waiting, He is deepening your roots. In the loss, He is making space for something greater. Trust the process, though it is quiet. Embrace the isolation, though it is uncomfortable. For the one who formed you in secret is still at work in the unseen. And when the time is right, you will rise not fragile and unsure, but whole, grounded, and ready. Not because of what you've done in the spotlight, but because of what He's done in the shadows. Happened when no one was looking.